Welcome to Live and Work More Human. When you're here with us, you're part of the global community driving change. Each conversation is an invitation to grow, to question, and to co-create a future where people, business, and society flourish together. And we, myself Alexis, and my co-host Sally Clark, are here to guide you on this journey, connecting you to big ideas, bold conversations, and brave questions that will help you live and lead more human every day. And today's conversation is all about how to be a full stack human. We have Dara Simkin joining us on the podcast to chat about what a full stack human means and how we can bring more humanity to our day-to-day, especially in a world that feels so saturated by technology. Dara Simkin is Australia's leading voice in play and the founder of Culture Hero. Now, Sally, full stack human. What was your key takeaways from today's conversation?
Look, as you know, Lex, I totally inhaled the book. So it was so much fun to have the opportunity to unpack even a little bit of it with Dara. For me, I think the key takeaway was really just this reminder of what it means to be human in a world of technology. Some of the things that we can get caught up in and sort of things that can distract us from our humanity, including busyness, including achievement, including all of those extrinsic motivating factors. For me, it was a conversation that really grounded me back into what it means to be human and with some really practical insights on how we can get there. How about you? What stood out for you?
I agree. I think that identity piece and how we can get so wrapped up in what our work means about us, not to us, but about us, and how we can kind of slowly create that healthy detachment from that again, so we can really come back into ourselves, into our values, into our bodies, what's important to us, and how we can create more presence and time and energy for the things that really light us up and make us feel alive. So that was one of the most poignant takeaways from our conversation today.
Amazing. I think it's such an inspiring conversation. I'm really excited for everyone to get to listen to this one. So without further ado, let's dive in.
Before we dive into the full episode, here's a quick message from our podcast partners. What if every organization could deeply understand and optimize the potential of its greatest asset, its people?
Humanico blends cutting-edge insight with powerful organizational intelligence to give leaders a single, clear map of their people and how they thrive.
Cut through the noise of disconnected tools and surveys. Humanico brings it all together into one dynamic, intuitive platform, empowering better decisions, wiser strategies, and stronger teams, so humans and organizations flourish.
Humanico, putting people first at every level. To learn more, visit humanico.co/live and work more human. That's humanico.co/live and work more human. Welcome to Live and Work More Human, Dara. It is so exciting to have you back with us on the podcast again, and this time to talk about your incredible new book, Full Stack Human. We have so many questions. We've tried to narrow them down so that our conversation doesn't run for 14 hours. But to get us started, it's such a robust and practical book. As you know, I called it unputdownable. It's also highly personal, and I think that's part of the reason why. Can you share a little bit of your journey to writing this book? What brought you to sit down and put pen to paper?
Well, to be honest, Tana and I had never actually set out to write a book. We co-created a workshop for South by Southwest Sydney 2 years ago, which was really an amalgamation of both of our schools of thought, mine very much around the play at work space and his around adaptability and technology and AI and science. And we delivered this workshop, which was called Adaptability at Play, which is really looking at adaptability as an embodiment practice. Giving people the opportunity. And, like last time I was on, we played the pointing game to really prove, how quickly we can learn about ourselves and explore and connect with things inside of us that wouldn't normally happen so quickly if it was just a conversation, for example. So Wiley happened to be in the audience that day and came up to us afterwards and said, "Do you want to make this a book?" And we were like, "Sure." And I'm always very dubious of those kinds of things. I'm like, yeah, whatever, cool, sounds good. But then like the email came, and then it was like, let's go. So, yeah, it was never really a thing for either of us. But Tane has a really famous and well-known global newsletter, which was originally Future Crunch and now Fix the News, where they report on good news. I'm always been very active for nearly the last 7, 8 years, writing articles and posts on LinkedIn. So both of us really love writing, also like writing keynotes, writing workshops. So it was sort of an easy thing for us to say yes to because we had this really cool concept that was obviously validated by the fact that Wiley wanted it. And so, yeah, we just got really stuck into it.
Love that, Dara. And the title of your book is Full Stack Human. So perhaps that's where we will begin. Can you tell us what exactly is a full stack human?
The metaphor comes from the computer programming space, which when someone's a full stack developer, they can basically create a program from end to end. So the back end, bits and bytes, zeros and ones, and all the data, and then the kind of shiny user interface, the apps that we kind of grow to know and love and become addicted to. So calling on that technology metaphor, which again, we thought it was really cool because we are in this huge age of technology. How do we create a technology metaphor for the way that we can show up? So the back end of what we explore in the book is very much around what our programming is. So we explore the concept of bias, which I think, we make a joke when we first started exploring the idea of bias, we was like, oh, there must be like 10 or 12 biases, that just, confirmation bias, negativity bias, all the ones that have been kind of popularized by kind of pop science and stuff like that. And then we started looking into like, holy shit, there's 188 biases that are running the show, but behind the scenes that we have no idea of. And this is really around, how do we sort of fill in the gaps when we don't have enough information, whether we need to act fast or there's not enough meaning in something. How do we actually, build out our reality through these biases, which are mostly inherited from our family, our surroundings, our culture, our religion, etc. So those are kind of our early programming, and that's into play. Then we've got our relationship to change, which I fell in love with the immunity to change framework many years ago when I worked with McKinsey and Robert Keegan and Lisa Lahaye's work, and really looking at, change is hard.
Mm.
And from a full stack human perspective, it's really looking at change as an opportunity more than a threat. And that's obviously easier said than done. However, when we live in this constant state of change, if we don't change our relationship to change, it is going to dominate us. And we talk about this idea of crashing the change party in the book, where you can crash the change party or the change party can crash you. And that's really, figuring out what are your behaviors that are kind of moving you towards or away the thing you want to change. What are your kind of assumptions, your fears, your worries, like really going under the hood to understand why change is hard. And a lot of it fundamentally has to do with the fact that we are wired to grow and we are wired to survive. And that in itself is a humongous juxtaposed psychological tug of war that exists within us. And if we don't recognize that, we just kind of acquiesce into what's going on, and change feels hard, and it always feels hard, and we berate ourselves because we can't change.
Can
And
we
then we've
just
got,
can we just hit pause there for a
yeah.
second, Dara? Because I'd love to. Change is such a fascinating topic,
Mm,
and it's one that, like, that I have a lot of side conversations around. And I love this metaphor of kind of crashing the change party. So taking some agency in your approach
mm.
to change, understanding what the glitches are, what makes it difficult. Do you have any sort of strategies, sort of right off the bat, for how we can kind of to start to shift in that direction and improve our relationship with change?
I mean, it's sort of an oversimplification of it, but just like realizing that change is inevitable.
Mm.
I think maybe it was Buddha who said it. It was like, change is inevitable, suffering is optional. Like change is forever happening no matter what. And so we can fight against it and kind of go against the tide, or we can find a flow and go with it. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. And I think sometimes we misconstrue the idea of relating to change in a different way as change will then be easy. And I think that that's just not true. It's still going to be difficult no matter what, but how we make meaning of it, how we show up to it, how we recover from it, how we move through it, that is what is going to dictate how much kind of um almost like juiciness we get out of it, right? Like change is such an uncomfortable space, and in discomfort is where we learn, right? And we can choose for that discomfort to become this fruitful learning space.
Mm.
And if we avoid it at all costs, first of all, it would eventually show up for us mentally or physically because, um, the body keeps the score. And yeah, I think, from a how to kind of manage change perspective, it's really just getting honest with yourself. And again, there's this framework that is super accessible in the book, which is called the immunity to change framework, which is basically identify what your change goal is, then think about all the things you're doing or not doing that again is moving you towards or away from that. And that could be things like, if I have a change goal of wanting to be more flexible, what am I doing in my life that's stopping me from being flexible? Well, I really like being right, or I really like being the smartest person in the room, or I really, like those kinds of just everyday behaviors that we don't necessarily think about. Then we look at what are the fears and worries that are driving that behavior. Well, I like being right because not being right makes me think that I'm actually appearing as incompetent. So this is like a programming from, again, going back to biases and early programming. I've been told something about or have learned something about how not being right makes you look dumb.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I've got these fears and worries that are kind of pushing that idea forward, which then goes into our big assumptions. So, a big assumption even farther to the idea that I look dumb if I'm not in control is that, not being in control is unsafe. And looking at that from a kind of larger perspective of an assumption that we're making about ourselves, the world, etc.
Yeah, I think what I love so much about your book, Dara, in there as well, is you really highlighted how deeply these are embedded in our identity. And I know that in the opening chapters of your book, you spoke around your own grief, around your identity, when you had sort of a culmination of all of these really challenging experiences come together at the perfect shitstorm period of time in your life, and how that was really challenging for you. And I think what you've just spoken to here, and the thing that we maybe need to label really clearly, is that the identity piece is so much of where the resistance comes from. It's thinking we are a certain way or a certain person, and change requires us to let go of some of those parts of our identity so that we can evolve into the next version of ourselves. And I wonder, could you tell us a little bit more around your story with grief and identity, Dara, that you illuminated in the book? Because I think you did it in such a beautiful way. And I just know there's so many people in our community that would be grappling with these same sort of entrenched identity challenges when they're looking at change.
I mean, I think for me is like I just let myself feel those dark feelings.
Mm,
I and we were just talking about it before we started recording. It's like I have a Spotify playlist that is called Feelings because sometimes we get so caught up in our own minds that we can almost like feel something is there. It's like maybe a tightness in our throat or a heaviness in our chest, but we're so cerebral in the way that we operate that accessing those feelings can sometimes feel hard because we've become so good at avoiding them. So sometimes you just need a trigger that's going to let the floodgates open, right? And I do it in a safe space. I do it in my room. I turn the lights off. I put my headphones on and I just put music on that I know is just going to make me bawl my eyes out. And, I get to a point where I'm kind of writhing in actual pain. I can feel the discomfort in my whole kind of middle section, like my stomach, my chest. I'm just like, I feel this intensity, this anger, and I'm riding it like a wave because that's what it is and what it needs. And I think just we can be so afraid of those feelings because maybe we think they're never going to end. And
mm,
if I open Pandora's box or a can of worms or whatever you want to call it, that it's not going to stop. But actually it
mm,
does because like no feeling is final and we're not going to just become consumed with this emotion and never be able to function again. But I think because in our society, being emotional seems still as a weakness. Being emotional is still not necessarily appropriate in a whatever context. And so we don't have just like the skills to do it.
mm, mm,
And for me, I think I've done so much therapy over the years and dug so deep into my own way of being that I know I'm really fucking good at compartmentalizing. Like I can just shove something so far down so that I can arrive in a playful place and hold space for other people and bring my energy and be the person I need to be. But then eventually that doesn't, it's almost like you can't keep ramming things in a jar. The jar is going to start
Yeah.
to leak or explode or whatever. So the invitation for anyone is to just figure out a way where you can get comfortable with feeling your feelings.
Mm.
And it can be in private, it can be in the dark. You can listen to music, you can shake your body, like whatever it is to just figure out what you need to kind of open the pressure cooker and just let it do its thing.
And this is really reminding me of the subtitle of your book, Dara, that we need to be able to stay human in a world ruled by technology. Because when we're talking about being able to access and feel our feelings, and I could really feel viscerally as you were describing that experience, the way that emotions move through the body, and really the wisdom that our bodies have, this incredible tool we have to navigate the planet. Do you think, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful ways in the book of, how we can think about staying human, but what does it mean to you to stay human in a world ruled by technology? And to some extent, it feels like it's ever increasingly so.
Mm. I think it's really connection to self. I think it's really being in relationship with yourself, which is so hard because again, we live in a society that is constantly taking us away from ourselves. And um I think it's just learning to sit with yourself. And I again, a lot of these when I share these concepts, they sound so oversimplified, but in practice they are incredibly difficult. It's like noticing, and I know, Alexis, this is, I'm gonna plug your new book coming up. But the thing with our phones, it is this escape from the discomfort of being still. And just noticing the impulse to grab it when there is a moment of like, I'm at the cafe and my friend's gone to the toilet. I can't just sit quietly at the table and look out the window. I have to grab my phone. Um, so yeah, I think, you know, another big part of sticking with our humanity is not only a relationship with self, but relationship with others. Like something that I've been crapping on about recently is like talking to strangers
Mm.
is such a powerful, simple tool to reconnect with your own humanity. And um, like giving someone a compliment on the street or having a chat with someone in the queue while you're waiting for your coffee. Just having those really fleeting interactions reminds you that you are alive and
That's
that there are other people that exist in the world that can be next to you physically, not just through this little black box.
I love that study that I think, and I'm going to have to look it up and add it to our show notes, but I think it came out of this Chicago where someone did a comparison of people who interact with other people on the train on their morning commute compared to those who don't. And the data is wild about how much more contentment they experience as a result of these sort of innocuous interactions, a compliment on a hat or a quick chat about whatever, something that you see out the window. I think we have this complexity bias where we assume that in order to feel these things, to feel connected, to experience fulfillment, it has to be incredibly complicated and hard, and we have to pay for it. Whereas
Mhm.
a lot of the techniques that you share in the book that I think are so powerful are kind of misleadingly simple.
And I think that's just like you said, like this complexity bias around, we think that things have to be hard in order for them to work. And I don't know where that's come from or who decided that, but we need to have a chat with them. But that's just the same thing with my own work around bringing play to work. It's like this is not complicated. It is not hard to get your people to have a 5-minute check-in before a meeting, or to like have everyone bring their lunch into the lunch area on a Wednesday to connect. Like just this necessity of like overcooking things. It's almost like we do it. It's like it's too hard. I can't do it. And that's just like, is that lazy? Is that disillusionment? Like what is the almost cognitive dissonance that's happening there where yeah, I'm fascinated by that.
It's such an interesting one, Dara, and obviously I have spent the last 2 years researching this. But I think there's a few things at play. I do believe that the sort of sense of disillusionment that we feel and like the disconnection we feel is sort of a result of us feeling completely time poor all of the time. I think we live in this bubble of narrative of never enough time, never enough money. You know, we're constantly seeing things about cost of living crisis and this and that in front of our faces all of the time. And so it does, whether we're conscious of it or not, keep us on this perpetual treadmill of I have to keep up, I have to keep up, I have to keep up. And because of that, we're so wired to then be on our phones, keeping up with the news, keeping up with everyone else, where we're missing, as you say, and the research you mentioned, Sally, like these tiny opportunities, but that, you know, seemingly tiny, innocuous opportunities just to look up on the train or the tram or on the bus and put the phone down and just have a chat to the person next to us. And I know for me personally, it's because I always feel too busy. Too busy is my excuse for everything. And it's, I think, the excuse a lot of us use, whether we're conscious of it or not, as to why we can't do these seemingly simplistic yet never have the time to do things. And it is the other thing I will say on that is that, you know, I have these conversations with my partner all the time as well, where he's like, yeah, I already know those things though. Like, I already know this. Well, I need new information. And I find that really funny because I think what most of us forget is we have to execute on those things to actually get their benefit. Knowing that connection is good for you, knowing that a cuppa with a good friend is better than 1,000 memes isn't good enough. You have to actually execute on the thing. You have to actually put the phone down or finish work at 4 p.m. and take the kids somewhere. You have to actually do the thing. So it actually, in a lot of ways, really is that simple. We're just not executing on the simple things very well.
I'd love to comment on the busy thing because I was actually thinking about this since writing the book of like, you know, when you ask someone how they're going and they say they're busy, like that is
Always.
actually not a state of being. And going back to this idea of cognitive dissonance, it's like I was starting to think about, you know, we call cow steak, right? I'm not saying I'm vegetarian and people shouldn't eat, like you eat meat if you want to, I eat meat, it's fine. But because of what the reality is of like, you know, what steak is, you don't say, I'm going to the pub to have some cow. Like you just don't say that because there's this level of discomfort of the reality of the situation that we have to create this space from it. So I was thinking about how busyness is almost this cognitive dissonance or like between or around what is actually happening for us.
Yeah.
That we are in a state of perpetual fried, frazzled, overwhelmed. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. But you like when someone's like, "How are you?" You wouldn't say, "I'm having an existential crisis. I'm hating being a parent. I can't. My work is shit at the moment." It's just like, "I'm busy."
Yeah,
And it's
totally.
like, what if we started to actually say the thing? Because I just feel like this blanket statement of busy, and like, you know, Brené Brown talks about it being a badge of honor. But it's like if we actually broke down what is behind people's busy, oof,
Yeah.
what
And
would we find?
I think the reason for that is we don't have time to deal with the emotional consequences that come with it. Like I
Mm,
know and I'm not proud to say this, but if there are days my partner comes home from work and I say, how's your day? And he's like, well, and I'm like, oh shit, I don't have time for this. You know,
mm.
like, you know, it's going to go somewhere. And a lot of the time it's again, that urgency culture, that always busy culture where we feel like we don't have enough time on the clock to actually be with our own emotions or those of others.
And I would argue here also that we actually don't have time not to, because I think as much as we can succumb to that narrative of like I'm too busy, there's too much to do, and to some extent that might be created, that might be imagined, but eventually the body keeps the score. Eventually that catches up with us. Eventually it's a existential crisis in the form of burnout, or it is, you know, reaching that point where you are so far removed from who you thought you were that you don't recognize yourself anymore. It's, you know, I think we have an obligation to ourselves to be a little bit courageous there as well, and to kind of shift that narrative from I don't have time to no, I have to make time for this, because in the long term, this is actually genuinely what matters.
Amen.
Now, Dara, one of the concepts in your book that really struck us was this idea of intelligent optimism.
Mm.
Now, I would consider myself as a regular old optimist. But can you explain for us what is an intelligent optimist or what is
Mm.
intelligent optimism? And can you share with us any examples of this in action?
Yeah, so I will have to give a shout out to Tane because this is his concept from Future Crunch. And intelligent optimism is really about being optimistic based on fact based evidence. So
Mm,
you are optimistic based on real data that you have found in the news or wherever your sources are that are credible and real. So you are optimistic because you know that better solutions are being built, right? So, for example, like his newsletter with his previous co-founder Gus or Angus Hervey, Fix the News, these are documented, true, like not fake news things that are happening in the world that let us know that is not all doom and gloom. Because from a clickbait perspective, from our negativity bias, doom and gloom sells. And, if there's 17 news articles about things that are horrible and, one thing that's great, it's going to be, oh, sorry, if there's 17 things that are great and one thing that's horrible, people are going to gravitate towards the horrible bit. And that is, again, a bias that we needed on the savannah back in the day when there was a rustle in the bushes or a shadow we didn't recognize. We had to anticipate danger in order to survive. We are
mm,
still programmed that way. So again, the more we can understand that we are wired to seek out the negative, not because we're all poopy heads and have shit colored glasses. Like it's actually because our brain is wired that way. And the more we can recognize our brain being attracted to that sort of media, like we're not able to foster that sense of intelligent optimism. So the best way that you can be more intelligently optimistic is step outside of your echo chamber of news and information and start seeking out other information that you might not usually seek out. Like
mm.
if you see something in the news, go and try and find a contrary viewpoint of it because there is always going to be one. But again, we have confirmation bias as well. Like we go and seek out the information to make us continue to believe our point because being wrong is uncomfortable. So it really is just a matter of realizing and looking at like where are you getting your information from? Is it credible? Is it relevant? And if it isn't, go and find something else. Because I think optimism is a great quality. However, it can be just kind of misguided, and it can kind of also kind of tip into toxic positivity around. Oh, hey, everything's gonna be okay. We're good. It's like how do you know that? Show me the
Yeah.
facts, you know?
I think that's an important point, Dara, because I think it takes us from being kind of in that dream state to actually having a quality of actionable reality in that as well.
Mm,
In that when I can see that there is a path forward or there are good things happening, I think it reverses some of the disillusionment that we are feeling when we see constantly negative news and wars and geopolitical crises and things like this on the internet as well. When we see that there's momentum towards a better future, it creates a sense of hopefulness, but it brings a level of reality to our ideology, perhaps as well. If we are one of those dreamers of like, it's going to be a better world, but here's actually a tangible way we can start doing something about that.
right, and that has to, like, we talk about hope and strategic hope in the book as well, which intelligent optimism and strategic hope, they're very much like peas and carrots
Mm.
because in order for you to have a sense of hope and to believe that you have agency and a pathway forward, you need to see that things are changing, that there is good in the world, you like, and again, that's where like these concepts kind of become woo woo around hope and optimism because we don't have evidence. And,
Mm.
you know, in order for us to actually believe something, truth, like that it's truth, we need evidence. Like that's just the way science works.
For me, it kind of feels like I've long used the term realistic optimism, which is extremely
Mm,
aligned with I think
mm,
actually intelligent optimism is just a better way of putting it. I might just adopt
mm.
that. But for me, it's this kind of feeling of having like feet on the ground, but head in the sky at the same
Mhm.
time. So I've got my roots down in the evidence, what's actually genuinely happening as a truth seeking person. And at the same time, I'm allowing myself to have that higher vision and look towards the horizon and think about the context of this and the possibility that
Mm.
this gives rise to. And I think the and of that is really exciting for me.
Yeah, and
Mm,
it's like going back, reflecting on what you just said. It's also, I think, with optimism, sometimes you're not able to really accept what is happening as well. Whereas with intelligent optimism, it's like, yeah, the world is pretty fucked up right now, and it's also getting better, and there's also good things going on. So it's the and where, again, going back to this idea of dialectical thinking and being able to hold two ideas in your head at once. And I think we started to talk about what full stack human is, and then we obviously went on beautiful tangents, which I love. I do think a huge part of being a full stack human is being able to hold your ideas lightly. It's being able to
yeah.
hold more than one idea in your head at once. And the more staunch we are with our ideas, the more, and that's based on tribalism and more of that kind of bias and evolutionary programming that we have, like, the worse off we're going to be, because everything, again, is always changing. And if you aren't able to change your mind, change your opinion when better data or better information is given to you, then you're going to be irrelevant and also wildly pessimistic.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, Derek, because for me, intelligent optimism seems to be where dreamers and cynics meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned is this idea of intelligence as well. For me, a truly intelligent person is someone who can be flexible and adaptable in their ideas, because I think anyone with a high IQ or who, is intelligently optimistic is willing to iterate on their thinking as new information and new data and new perspective comes into the fold. So I think it goes without saying that that's implicit within intelligent optimism. And if you consider yourself someone who is intelligently optimistic, then I would hope that you are regularly changing your mind as new information comes into the fold, and not in a fickle way, but in a very
Mm,
considered, adaptive, always moving forward kind of way.
mm. And I think it's to do with evidence, with
Yeah.
data. Like numbers don't lie. Maths is important. Science is important. It's the way that we can make sense of the world in in a way that is there's proof.
We wanted to turn to a topic that I think all three of us have recent experience with, we might also say, Dara, and that is achievement syndrome. And it's something that you open up quite early in the book. And it was really the point of the book where I underlined a lot throughout the entire book, but this was basically the whole page. Because I think it's something that just resonates so viscerally for me, and I think for many people, this idea that we become somewhat enmeshed with our achievements. A, a couple of questions, really. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is, what it
Mm.
looks like? And then I'm curious if you have like a message to your younger self that you would like your younger self to know about achievement syndrome, if you
Mm.
could.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to pay credit where credit is due. This concept is by Michael Simmons, who's a fantastic researcher and very AI focused kind of tech human guy in the States. I was subscribed to his newsletter because I think, and for you, Sally, as well, like, you've been working on this burnout space for a long time. And so what was fascinating for me was to actually figure out, like, what happens before burnout. Like, where is that cultural programming? And based on the book as well, when we talk about an operating system, we're really trying to get under the hood of where this stuff is coming from. And so achievement syndrome is sort of this, like, slow, steady, kind of quiet thing that's happening in the background. We talk about it's almost like carbon monoxide, seeping into the room, and you don't actually know it's there until you choke or die, to be mildly morbid. But it starts with our early programming. And I think, for the way that rote learning is set up and school is designed, is you get report cards and you get SAT scores and you get a star when you do a really good job, or you get a trophy, or you get a badge, and you're like, ooh, this feels good, and plays on our dopamine and all those things. And so we start to attach this kind of value to doing well and being a good kid, and it creates a sense of belonging. It's like, when I do the right thing and when I'm ticking the boxes and getting straight A's, I belong. Teachers like me. It's great. And so we sort of start to bring that into our young adult life. And we might go and have a passion for something, and we're plodding along and doing the thing, but then we might get a promotion, or we might get some recognition, and then all of a sudden the thing that we were really passionate about is now connecting to our identity, because
Mm.
our output is essentially the thing that's getting rewarded, right? It's like extrinsic motivation more so than intrinsic. When we're little, we do things because it feels so good. It's just like we're just like these little feeling machines. But then as we start to externalize our experience through work and school or whatever, we're getting this validation elsewhere. So we start to fuse our identity to that output. And then we just sort of start to double down on it. We're like, this feels great. And we're just like, go. And so we sort of, yeah, like we start to, we want to know how to be more efficient. We want to know how to be more productive. We want to know how to smash out more work, because then we get even more recognition. We get like, especially if you're in sales, you're like, I'm winning that cruise to Bali this year to meet my KPIs or whatever it is. But then eventually, like that return, it's like this we call it like the diminishing curve. It just like what goes up must come down, and it just kind of like it doesn't feel as good anymore. And also because you are not as young and virile as you once were. And so your energy slows down, your capacity starts to be eaten away, and then all of a sudden you're still doing because this is how you've kind of been programmed, but then it doesn't feel as good.
I wonder if part of it is also because it's not just how we've been programmed, but we also have some sense, perhaps subconsciously at first, that it's not genuinely who we are. We're not actually living a life that we want, that we find fulfilling authentically in who we are. We're living according to someone else's idea of what matters, what achievement is, what success looks like. And I think it's like that creeping incremental awareness that can kind of come in a bit like, and again, to continue the morbidity, like Grim Reaper sort of sneaking in the background, and it sort of becomes quite existential. Like, is that I see that in burnout? Does that track with achievement syndrome too?
Well, I think it's systemically the way that we view success, right? And it's like when you work your ass off, you get paid, and when you get paid, you get the car, and you get the house, and you get the fancy watch, and it's it's a status thing. And so, we can thank capitalism and a continuously growing economy of where like there's no end point. Like it's just like let's just keep going, let's just keep going. So I do think the programming comes not only from the way our parents view success, the way our parents viewed work, the way our community viewed it, but also just from a more systemic perspective, how the Western world views work as salvation. And I blame the Puritan work ethic a lot, you know. And this is 500 years of programming where work has been seen as something that is virtuous.
And laziness or rest is sinful.
Correct. Yeah.
Dara, what do you think is the hardest part about embodying or being a full stack human?
I think it's really going against everything that we have been taught, going against every system that we exist in, really having to be a bit of a rebel around going, I'm not doing this anymore. You know, the idea that we write in the book is like, how do we stop sacrificing our humanity for success? I think based on how much pressure AI is putting on productivity and relevance and speed and all those things, like I'm finding that finally the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And so all of these systems that are essentially fraying at the seams around government, school, work, etc., like all of the operating systems that they've been operating under essentially for hundreds and hundreds of years it's just not working anymore. And I think sometimes the hardest part about being a full stack human is not getting lost in the sense of helplessness because of these systems, because again, what we spoke about before and in the book, there are so many micro activities, micro moments, micro habits that we can start to incorporate into our life that builds our capacity. And one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about since the book, and we do name it a bit around the leadership chapter around conditions, like there are some conditions and environments that we exist within that we have control over and some we don't. And it's really being able to be honest with ourselves and go, okay, I don't actually have that much control over what's happening at work. However, I can control the media I consume. I can control the people that I spend my time with. I can control how I treat my mind and my body. And by having agency in that, of being able to fill your cup when you can, that then gives you more capacity to deal with the environments that you don't necessarily have the most control over. So I think it's, as a full stack human, the tricky part is going, okay, what is in my control and what isn't in my control? And the things that are in my control, what are tiny things that I can do to build my capacity, to fill my cup? And one thing that I think is really ass backwards, in my opinion, is how we use play as a reward for work. Like, I'm gonna work my ass off and then I'm gonna go on holiday. But then wait, when I get on holiday, I get sick because I'm not pumped with adrenaline anymore and my body can exhale. And now I'm sick on my holiday. Whereas I think if we see play as a vehicle, as an entry point, as almost like the prerequisite for work, that it allows us to be in a regulated state from a nervous system perspective, allows us to be collaborative, allows us to be imaginative, allows us to be curious, allows us to be adaptable, you know, that is when we can have a more sustainable way of existing. And so by treating play as a reward, I think we are really missing out, because if I want to, you can't force a frazzled nervous system to rest. You need to just like down regulate first a little bit to do that. And if we have practices in our lives where we understand what we need as an individual to down regulate, to have some semblance of recovery, then we can start to really truly rest. So yeah, I think the most difficult part about being a full stack human is basically pushing up against every system in existence while it's also having to exist within it. And again, holding those two ideas in your head at once. I have control and I don't have control. And that is what is, and that's okay, because I can figure out ways to navigate it in a way that serves me.
Brilliant perspective, Dara. And again, another one that feels seemingly simple on the surface, in that recognizing where we have agency and owning our control in those scenarios. And yet when the world does feel so constantly overwhelming, and there does feel to be so many of these bigger societal and global issues at play, we can feel like a tiny little drop in the ocean without much agency. So it's such an important reminder. And a final question: what do we stand to gain, or what's the best part about being a full stack human?
I think what you stand to gain is a life that has aliveness. I think that what we're experiencing at the moment is a real kind of energy suck. Like, like what does it feel like to actually be alive and feel aliveness in you? Because busy, burnt out, exhausted, overwhelmed, that is not a state of aliveness. And so I feel like, when we talk about hope, intelligent optimism, play, adaptability, that is all aliveness, a sense of energy and just like, I'm alive, basically. I am alive.
We are alive. And I think this is such a perfect message to end on, Dara. It is something that we all deserve, to feel genuinely embodied and alive in this amazing, magnificent life that we get to call ours. Thank you so much for coming back to be on Live and Work More Human. It's been such an amazing conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. It's great to be back with you two lovely ladies.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of Live and Work More Human. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, you can find all the details in our show notes, or visit us at liveandworkmorehuman.com. We'll see you next time.